Welcome to Nieuw Rechts, or for our English listeners, Nieuw Right. My name is Daniel de Liever, and today we're going to talk about European identity. What is it? Does it actually exist? And I'm happy to discuss this topic with David Engels. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. So I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Me too. For people in this niche, you are quite well known. But for those that don't know you, you are a Belgian, like from the German Belgium, historical and research professor and author. And you used to work between 2008 and 2018 at the Free University of Brussels. You also afterwards worked in Poland in the Institute Zakotny, and afterwards, now you're working in France. So you're moving to different countries at ICAS, and you still are also busy as a writer. So for people that don't know, you're mostly known for your historical and philosophical analysis and books. So I think that will give us a great insight into the topic of today. And I want to start out a little bit personal. Um, why did you actually get interested in studying like the history of European identity?
Well, on the one hand, there's the biographical part, of course. I'm really interested in identity questions because as a Belgian, as a multilingual Belgian, whose mother language is German, partly also French, who did ancient languages and some others, somehow this question of identity was really important for me. I mean, as a Belgian, we have such a complicated situation. We don't really have a national identity as such, even if there is something like a true Belgitude. The more I'm living in Poland and the more I'm discovering about what unites Belgians of different languages. So there is a little bit of a Belgian identity, but in general, I rather see my provenance from Belgium as a possibility to explore and to know better about many facets of European identity. So I feel in myself, from a certain perspective as well, the Germanic culture, the French or Roman culture. I have a big liking also for Great Britain. I'm interested in ancient languages. So I'm trying, or my interest in identity is also, from a certain point of view, also wish to understand, let's say, a bit more about my own very crazy identity. And from a certain point of view, many of these people who come from different language groups or from different identities tend to become rather cosmopolitans, globalists, and so on. But on my side, it was very different. On my side, rather, it gave me a big love for my own European identity, for this magnificent Western civilization, which I'm trying to define and to defend as good as I can.
Yes, and I do think, of course, everyone has some connection to their own identity, right? Everybody has a feeling of where they belong, where they come from, what they want to feel connected to. But still, it feels like it's for many people it might be kind of abstract what the identity means. So maybe it's good also to start there. When we talk about European identity, first of all, there are many people nowadays on the progressive side that say there is no such a thing. So maybe you can explain a little bit of, is there such an identity, and what does it actually concretely mean?
Yeah, that's of course an enormous question, so I can just touch little bits and pieces here and
Of
there.
course.
But yeah, there is a European identity, and nobody would have, let's say, put that into question until perhaps 50, 60 years ago. I think that even in the 19th century, even at the height of what is called nationalism and so forth, people were very keenly aware, even though they were French patriots, German patriots, British patriots, that there was such a thing as a European civilization, very different from, for example, the Chinese civilization, the Muslim civilization, the Indian civilization, and so forth. Strangely, paradoxically, it is since we have the European Union, or this European unification process, that this conscious about belonging together is slowly disappearing. Why? Well, this is very easily under explained, because the European project at the beginning was still constructed on a very essentialist understanding of what identity means. It was essentially constructed on traditional, conservative, even Catholic values. Founding fathers like Schumann or like Adenauer, so they knew what they were doing. But step by step, year by year, the European Union has become more and more leftist, more and more globalist, more and more woke, and is trying to define what makes Europe European only through human rights, through global values. And so this is why people are slowly disentangling with with the more conservative understanding of Europe, because when they hear European identity, they associate that with the leaflets of the European Union speaking about freedom and democracy and liberty and diversity and that kind of thing, and are saying, well, if this is Europe, what makes this European? As these are human values that could apply everywhere in the world. So unfortunately, the European institutions, as they are evolving, is destroying, from a certain point of view, a more traditional understanding of what European identity used to mean and what it still means if we just open our eyes to what unites us everywhere in Europe. And because of that, unfortunately, we are now in a real deep, I think, identity and institutional crisis because of this question.
Yes, and I do think many people, even if they would not be able to clarify why, I think intuitively people would agree with that. And let's we're going to talk in depth about how this happened, but maybe it's good to start with, if there's one thing that you want people to take away from our conversation about what this European identity can mean, as opposed to the progressive view of the European Union at the moment, what would be the thing that you want people to remember and to understand and maybe even discover for themselves?
I mean, there are different misunderstandings about European identity. On the one hand, the usual response to what makes Europe European or our civilization unique would very often be a purely historical understanding, like it's the unification or the addition of Christian religion, Greek philosophy, Roman statecraft, and so forth. But I think these are only the roots of our identity. I think that European civilization only starts with the Carolingians, with the Ottonians, so in the early Middle Ages, and that something really new emerges on the basis, of course, of the remnants of the Roman tradition, of the Greek tradition, and of course of Christian spirituality. And this new thing that is emerging is what I've often called, also in allusion to a very well-known 19th century term, the Faustian spirit. The Faustian spirit, which is this longing for what is beyond our grasp. This what the Greeks often called even hubris. So this deeply European feeling to want to discover what is just beyond the horizon. And this leads, of course, not only to enormous spiritual adventures, especially in Christianity, but also to also an enormous let's say, expansion in scholarly and scientific terms. Already in the early Middle Ages, you have these people like St. Brendan or others exploring the Atlantic. You have others that are trying to map the world. You have these gigantic cathedrals. You have then later on the explorations with discovering America and the entirety of the world. You have the wish to know the smallest, that is the atom, and the highest, that is to explore space. So I think this typically Faustian longing is what is properly European, because the other civilizations like the Chinese or the Muslim or before us, the Greek or Romans, they had other archetypes, but they did not have this typically Faustian longing. And I think this is truly what makes Europe European, or what makes the European civilization European. But on the other hand, it is something that is also very ambiguous. On the one hand, it can play out for the best, like in the Middle Ages, with its deep interiority and its quest for the human soul, but also for the worse in modern times, when everything has been reduced to pure materiality, to pure material egalitarian atomized expansion, but the root of both is, I think, the same. And that is what unites us everywhere in Europe. And that explains, of course, why for so many centuries, from Portugal to Poland, from Norway down to Italy, we have a culture, a civilization that is quite homogeneous, that makes it possible, as I said, for Portuguese to go into a Polish museum and to feel absolutely at home with the evolution of art styles, of physiognomies, of history of thought, of modes, of styles, of questions, of errors, and so forth.
I think one point I really want to pick your mind on what you just said there is you said that both, let's say, the two ends that we're now seeing in the culture war, the more progressive and conservative view of what it means to be European, to have this identity, have the same root. And I tend to agree with you. But you still see this, like I said, cultural war going on. So how can we, when we have a common root, and we have two very different perceptions of what it not only means to have an identity in an abstract sense, but also how it translates to our concrete society, how do you think we can come to an understanding of this in a way that can help guide these kind of culture war that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, that's the fundamental question, of course, you are asking, and I just wrote a book on the subject also, called Défendre l'Europe civilisationnelle, published last year. Unfortunately, there's no English or Dutch translation yet, but in which I'm precisely answering or trying to answer that question. As you said, even the worst excesses of wokeism are still typically European. No other civilization would come up with that kind of thing. The towers of a cathedral, or the twin towers or the ex-twin towers or the tower of a skyscraper are coming from the same longing, basically. So unfortunately, wokeism is a brainchild of the Faustian spirit. But I think it is also a dead end. I think that all civilizations are evolving in a way that could be described as dialectic, meaning that in the first phase, all civilizations are really trying to come to terms with the notion of transcendence, of God, of the divinity, of the immortality of the soul. That is, the entire civilization and society is oriented towards what comes after death, basically, into the transcendence that infuses the world. But all civilizations also know a second step, and in this second antithetical step is marked by rather materiality, science, egalitarianism, utopianism, and so forth. And this starts, of course, with the European civilization somewhere around the 16th century, with the Reformation, with the Renaissance, with humanism, with the big discoveries, and so forth. And I think that that wokeism is, for the moment, is the apogee of this anti-transcendent wish to dominate not only our civilization, but the world from a purely materialist point of view. And so from a certain point of view, this wokeism is the apogee of the errors of humanism. This belief that the human being and its spirit is the measure of all things. And what is interesting in that is that wokeism is now leading this misconception of classical humanism to an extreme where it can only dissolve, basically. It becomes so absurd, it becomes so detached from God, from nature, from the world, even from logical thinking, as it is, that it is at the brink of becoming so absurd and surreal that people will simply drop it. And then, of course, we will have to answer the fundamental question which you ask, okay, what next? And I think that this what next can only reside in what I call a rational return to tradition. That is, knowing that pure reason can only lead to its self-dissolution, and that for these reasons we need to understand that without transcendence, and thus also without the tradition through which transcendence becomes understandable for us human beings. Without that, our civilization will simply dissolve, and that is precisely what is happening. So I'm quite optimistic that not on the short-term perspective, but on the middle-term perspective, perhaps during the next 20 years or so, there might be some form of synthetical return to tradition as all civilizations have known it, like the Roman Empire as being the final phase of Greco-Roman antiquity, like the Han dynasty in China, like the Gupta in India, like partly the Fatimids in the Muslim world. So I think we will also know that kind of evolution. But on the other hand, this will not go automatically, but it will be a fight during the next 10, 20 years that will have to resolve this solution of this big question you asked.
Thank you for that answer. And what would you say to people that are hearing this, but when a lot of people nowadays think of the Roman Empire, for example, they think of that at some point it fell. And there's this fear also I see from the Dutch perspective of losing this European civilization, this European identity. You're saying in the next 20 years you're kind of optimistic, but what would you then say to maybe more conservative people that are not as optimistic that this synthesis can happen, because we are moving to a point where a lot of it is either forgotten or deteriorated?
Absolutely. I mean, concerning your first question, this is of course a question of perspective. I mean, everything in this world will fall. If there is one security we have, it is that all states, all societies, all civilizations, all empires fall in the long run. I think that the Roman Empire, if you take this as an example, with half a millennium, is quite a nice perspective if you are on the beginning side. So I think that this is of course much longer than most European nation states until now. So it's not that bad as a perspective. But yeah, everything is linked to the laws of contingence, especially our own existence. I mean, how long do we live? 80, 90 years, something like that. So we should be happy to construct something that lasts perhaps a half millennium, a bit more, a bit less. Why not? But yeah, the other problem is, of course, is that really such a positive perspective? On the one hand, yes, of course, the Roman Empire is certainly as well as the Han Empire, as well as the other empires I named, is certainly from when it comes to welfare, to wealth, to logistics, to civilization, culture, and so forth, not a bad perspective. But it is, of course, constructed on the sacrifice in large parts of a certain creativity and of a certain freedom. The Roman Empire is, in contrast to the Roman Republic and, of course, to the Greek city-states, an authoritarian state. We need to understand that you cannot become emperor just because people vote for you. There is an emperor there who wants to keep his job, basically. So we have to and also such a state, and you mentioned that fact, is based on at least partly artificial approach of tradition. I mean, already when Augustus founds the Principate, he has to reinvent a lot of traditions that were not known, or that were forgotten, or that were not politically agreeable to him. So in part, this return to tradition, as I said, is a rational return to tradition, because the tradition from many respects or many points of view is already broken. And there were many people in the early empire, as well as in the other civilization states of other civilizations, that criticized it. That say, well, this is artificial. It sounds American somehow. It sounds a bit made up. But on the other hand, this was the only possibility if the people wanted to avoid going back to the Civil War periods. And I think that many conservatives, if they will really be confronted to such a synthetical civilization state, will have the same feeling. I will most certainly have it. On the one hand, there will be this feeling of, okay, well, that's the best alternative we can get if we don't want to commit full suicide as a civilization. On the other hand, we will feel that this is not the real thing. It is not the real tradition. like we had it for half a millennium in the Middle Ages. It will be partly really artificial, but this will probably be the price the European civilization will pay, exactly as all the other civilizations have paid it in their time. So this is just to make this sure, also for the people listening to us. Um, I'm not speaking about a political utopia. This is not my personal ideal state as I would like to have it. I'm rather speaking as a historian who compares different civilizations and who, when he sees that the thing has happened already 13 or 14 times, that probably the 15th times this will be quite similar. So this is rather my approach. It's not my choice, but I think it is inevitable.
All right. And you mentioned a lot the tradition. I do think for many people, it's not even self evident what you mean by tradition. Do you mean by the tradition Christianity? Do you mean more of the, if you talk about, for example, Dutch or German perspective, the Germanic tradition? Before you also talked about Faustian. I think it's also good maybe to explain what you mean by that, because I think for many people it is not obvious what you mean by that. So maybe you can give us a little bit of a structure for what this actually means.
Mhm. Well, Faust comes, of course, from this medieval important figure of the scholar who, in his longing for things he can't comprehend, finally sells his soul to the devil, and his wish is that he can get the full powers of the devil as long as he remains dissatisfied with what he gets. And only, that is part of his bargain, only if one time he says, wow, this is exactly what I want to be, I'm where I am, and everything is perfect, that's the moment when the devil can then say, okay, that's what you wanted, now I get your soul. And Faust, of course, capitalizes on this fact that he thinks that he cannot be satisfied anyway, and so that he can get his full powers and get away with the bargain, basically. And I think this is very typically European. No other civilization has this longing for what is beyond, for what is this eternal dissatisfaction and liking for more. More, as I said, must not necessarily be more material powers, which is the case today, but it can also be more knowledge of God, for example. And then we come to the part of tradition. When I speak of tradition, I tend to speak about this a bit in a perennialist way. You see, in the recent years, I've been strongly influenced by the reading of the works of Fridtjof Schwan, notably a little bit of Guénon also. So this idea that there is a true tradition, which means that the how can I explain that? All civilization at the beginning of their evolution start their path with a very specific understanding of transcendence. This gives, for example, rise to the Greco-Roman polytheism, to, for example, the Muslim understanding of religion, to Taoism or to Buddhism. And in Europe, our way has been Western Christianity. This has been our approach to this eternal secret of this primordial unity and entity that is beyond everything we can grasp and understand, and which is true transcendence, which is the true divinity. And this divinity thus manifests itself through the civilizations and, of course, through the different traditions that these civilizations develop. And this is, of course, the true tradition. One part of it is, of course, the Latin Mass. The Latin Mass and the Latin ritual of the Catholic Church is one of the, I think, highest expressions of tradition and longing for transcendence in the Western civilization. And it is typical, of course, that just to take this example, there are many others, like our understanding of family, of nature, of beauty, all that stems from a certain traditional approach towards transcendence. But it is so typical that all these understandings, and especially, of course, the Tridentine Mass, are disappearing, are not understood anymore, are even cancelled, like in the Second Vaticanum and under the previous Pope, Francis, who try precisely to undermine this true tradition that links us to our 1,000 years of history in order to replace it with something that doesn't stem from an organic evolution of a primordial understanding of transcendence, but that is a pure brainchild, like the Second Vaticanum, or like the modern understanding of family, or like the modern understanding of art. Everywhere the organic evolution of tradition is replaced by a purely rationalist, purely abstract understanding of some norms or some utopian society that is not constructed based on the rules of our being, but rather on, let's say, on the pure tabula rasa, which is why ultimately it must fail, and which is why wokeism will fail also. It will fail, but on the other hand, the moment it fails will be marked by a huge crisis in the entire West, because we will suddenly lose the only ground that was still left to us, and we will have to reinvent ourselves totally.
I think that's a profound answer, and I do think it also shows it could calm people a little bit, knowing that this tradition is not something you can come up with on your own in your own room and just invent like postmodernists and woke as try to do, and among them others, of course. But it's more of a living, breathing, organic thing, which comes, I would say, quite natural to people. So I do think there's also some hope in there. But like you said, there is a crisis we have to go through, and we are, I think, already going through to get to the other side, so to speak. And I think one of the things I'm interested in is, in the beginning, we talked about that there is now, you could say, an attack on the tradition that's been going on for decades at this point. How do you think, if we look at the practical point of view, where we have now a structure around this modern, you could say, antithesis to tradition, how do you think we can reorganize in such a way that we can still keep, you could say, some of the benefits of organization, so we don't fall into pure chaos, while going to a organic way of the tradition?
Yeah, that's of course the most important question: how to organize ourselves in order to defend what is left of tradition, to reconquer what we have lost from tradition, and to resist to the utter self-destruction. Because what needs to be said is that it is well and easy, as I try to do it, to speak about how history will evolve anyway, but that doesn't mean that it will be easy for us and that we will not have to struggle, even if we know that a certain end is probable, or a certain outcome is probable. That doesn't mean we can just sit down and wait for it to happen. We will have to struggle. We will have to fight to get what will be the end anyway. And how to organize that fight? Well, there are different perspectives. I mean, for the moment, so many people, when Donald Trump was elected, or when people like Orban or Kaczynski or Meloni or Wilders got into power, well, many people thought that, okay, wokeism is over, and we conservative, or what they call conservatism, is the future thing, and so on. And no, to the contrary, we see that, especially since the election of Donald Trump, there has been an extreme narrowing down of the, let's say, of the political possibilities of conservatism in Europe. We have a big fight against conservatism during these last months and years, even before or just before Trump's elections. Like in Poland, we spoke when we before this discussion, we spoke about the situation in Poland with this authoritarian system that Donald Tusk is placing here everywhere in order to exclude conservatism from power for the next 10 years. We see how prudent and careful Meloni must be. We see how Orban is under threat and may perhaps not politically survive the next elections. We have seen what is happening in Romania. We have seen the manifestation demonstrations in Slovakia. We have seen Marine Le Pen excluded from the elections in France. Now, on the day I'm speaking with you, the AfD in Germany has been declared as being officially right, extreme right by the Verfassungsschutz, which may lead, or perhaps one day, to its exclusion even from the political race. So everywhere, wokeism is not dead at all. To the contrary, they are trying to fortify their position. So this will be a big fight, and the question is how can conservative people survive that? Of course, conservatism, that might be, of course, also another question. But when I speak about conservatism, a lot of things in there. But as you may have understood, my own position is not that of a, let's say, more populist, nationalist, sovereigntist, liberal thinker. I'm more deeply attached to Christian values, to civilizational values, to this historical essence of Europe. So my own approach is a bit different from that of many of the typical right-wing people. But the answer to the question would be there need to be two positions. On the one hand, the political fight need to continue one way or the other, but we should realize that the true fight is on the cultural level. The fight is not the fight for more or less seats in any parliaments, even though it's important, but we need to win the cultural fight. We need to explain to people, or rather to bring nearer to people, the love for our civilization, for our tradition, for our home countries. And if we have some energy, we need to put all that in culture, in writing novels, in doing movies, in living the ideal of Europe and of our nation states that we want to embody. We have to embody them and become examples. We have to become not people who are ridiculized or discredited, but we need to become people to whom others can look up for their moral integrity, for their deep love of transcendence, for their love of their civilization. And unfortunately, in many of the right-wing parties, there are not many of these people around. They speak very often. They have good ideas, and their programs may sound nice, but they are not yet themselves what they want to become, if what they want the country to become back. We need these examples. We need saints again. There are no saints around, so to say, from our side, and this is extremely important. And in order to get to tie all that together in a period like today's period, where persecution is already underway, we need to found little societies. We need to found associations. We need to have a very complex Europe-wide networks of thousands of little initiatives and publishing houses and ecological enterprises and security funds and social securities and schools and academies, and we need to build a parallel society if we want to survive. This is basically also what I tried to express in my book Was Tun, that has been translated into Dutch some years ago, What Moeten We Doen, by the Blue Tiger Media. Because this is where I really tried that. Okay, the political fight is one thing, but the fight for identity, the culture war, for trying to put forth the values of the family, of our home region, of our home country, of our religion, of our tradition, of our way of life. This must be the most important fight, and that is not something you can do with just putting a cross every 4 years on a bulletin in a democratic system. This is a fight that needs to go on every day, and I think this is the only way we can survive. We need to take. It may sound a bit paradoxical or cynical, but if you look at the strength of many of the Muslim societies that have developed in Europe, it is based exactly on that. They have built parallel societies that work extremely well, and that can help them to have this form of autarchical structure. And we need that as conservatives if we want to survive, because the state and the society does not belong to us anymore. We are more and more considered as their enemies, unfortunately, even though we are its essence. And so we need to protect us by building up our own system.
I think that's a profound point, but I will say that as many of the people that are listening are probably going to be Dutch, and Netherlands, as you might know, it went from in 1950 to being one of the most conservative, even religious countries in Europe, to being the complete opposite, very secular, very progressive. So even if I look on the right, of what we now consider the right, there is no unity on what this means, right? You also have a lot of people that might consider themselves cultural Christians or conservatives or whatever that are having very different opinions to, you could say, what Christians have. So how would you approach this when the majority of people that are going to do this kind of work are not going to be Christian? And to give a personal example, I'm not Christian. I'm Jewish. I have even a different different perspective as well. So there are a lot of people trying to come together on this project that have very different, profound understandings there.
That's the big problem, and all late civilizations show that this return to conservatism, or this return to the roots, to tradition, and so on, is the work of little elite. The large masses are lost, indeed, and this cannot be helped. Most of them don't care, simply going to whatever shopping mall is nearby to you, and you will see it. These are people that do not belong anymore to the European civilization in their heart. It's not a question of migration background. It's a question of really feeling their belonging. And I've had so many people when I worked, still working in, let's say the university where I'm working for the moment is a bit of a counterexample, but most universities, the students I had, they are already post-historical and post-European students, even though they are ethnically, whatever that means, European. So the fight first is a fight of a minority, because on the other side, the woke power is also a very tiny minority. Most people follow that because the boomers hear that every day on the television, and the others learned it at school or just follow that out of pure opportunism. But I don't think there are many people who really believe in wokeism. There's a tiny elite that imposes its view, and if by any chance, for example, from today to tomorrow, our entire media system would not be controlled anymore by woke journalists, but by conservative journalists, in 1 week, probably the entire population would suddenly start to be conservative, because most don't care only. So it's not about how convincing 80-90% of the population of such a point of view. It is working with an elite and trying to address a certain elite. And of course, there are different paths. I mean, you can always help. I mean, I'm trying to do that by writing my books, by giving interviews, by trying to educate my children, to trying and failing very often to be a correct example to the people around me. But we can do a lot in order to inform others. And that's why I say that I often said that someone like, for example, Tolkien did probably 100 times more for what I call true tradition than most prime ministers, most even conservative prime ministers of these last generations, because he wrote something that is not only beautiful but is also true, and that has inspired generation of people. This is the kind of thing that has a much larger impact in changing people's mentalities than just having some law on whatever question, on migration, on family, on education, whatever is there around. But in the end, the path towards tradition and towards a traditionalist understanding of our identity must be a personal path. It can only be step by step. You cannot force people to convert to any religion, to understand or to feel what transcendence is, to feel the staggering beauty of our works of art. This is not something you can force down on something. You can open doors in order to show to them what is behind, but they have to walk through by themselves. And this is a very difficult and long process that can only be resolved by grassroots initiatives like those I'm speaking about. Of course, they can be helped by the media, by the politics, and so forth. But in the current situation, I think this really needs to to start from below. And there are countries where this is happening, like France, for example. During these last weeks or last years, I've been very often in France. I'm teaching there by now also. And this is probably one of the countries, together with the Netherlands, of course, and the UK and Belgium, that is in the worst shape probably in Europe for many reasons. But this is also where we have so many identitarian movements that are starting. They are everywhere. Little associations, little foundations, people rediscovering the Tridentine Mass, for example, trying to connect back with their Catholicism, trying to found little villages where they live with other people in what they consider the right way. So many little publishing houses, websites, little journals, even enterprises and links with other enterprises and school and so forth. There are a lot of things. It's still very a minoritarian approach, but things are happening at least there. While on the other side, like in the country where I'm living for the moment here in Poland, uh, we are in a country that is still quite conservative when it comes to majority of the population from a cultural point of view, but they don't even understand that they are currently totally transformed and destroyed. And so I think you need to reach somewhere really the bottom of the pit in order to understand really what is happening and to start defending. The French have understood that, they are doing that. The Poles don't even understand that they are descending, and thus they don't even know against what they have to fight back.
And what would you say, well, if you talk about France or other countries in Europe, then when you're talking about rediscovering tradition and identity, we're also now in a situation where you have more increasing people from outside of Europe, also with a different religious tradition, especially Islam, who is also gaining ground in European societies. So, how do you think that the potentially clashes, as many people experience, I would say, in their daily lives, with the more European traditional view that you are trying to expand in a way?
That's a really important question. I mean, as a historian of civilizations, I consider Islam as well as Buddhism or Taoism as as legitimate ways to join transcendence. I don't believe in any form of innate superiority of one religion or one civilization over the others. I think they are all, through the entirety of history, they have all been different endeavors to reach the one true being. They all have within their system, within their own context, within their system of thought, a certain justification for what they do, and they all develop their vision of beauty, of truth, of family, of nature, of human friendship, and so forth. They're all systems I would never want to classify in a vulgar, hierarchical or technological way. I don't think that works like that. So from that perspective, I have, I think, much more sympathy with a truly believing Muslim, or Buddhist, or Taoist, or whatever, than with a person that is ethnically European, but at the same time anti-traditionalist, that is woke, materialist, atheistic, that hates its own civilization and that believes in this omnipotence of the human mind and the human being. So from that point of view, let's say I think I could better understand what happens in the mind of another religious person believing in transcendence and so forth than in someone who is absolutely disconnected from tradition and transcendence. That being said, of course, there's the other side. There is the side of the culture war. It's not only about transcendence and traditions against non-tradition. There is such a thing as civilizations, and many of these approaches towards transcendence, I would say, are in large parts not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you need a lot of efforts to understand why they desperately try to speak about the same thing. This is a big effort that you cannot do in the masses. When you look at the large masses, it's about questions like, do you believe in that or not? If you believe, then it's good. If not, then you are bad, basically. And this will not disappear because these traditions, they are closed systems. You can't mix them. You can't mix Islam and Christianity and form something new out of that. They have their justification in their context. Now we have the situation in Europe that we have this large scale mass migration with many towns like my own hometown in Belgium that is already largely Islamized. I was there last week. Basically, the fight is over. The town is Muslim, and it's the same in many communities I know in the Netherlands, in the UK, in France. And this will give rise to huge fights. And on that side of the fight, when it comes on the fight between the European Western Christian tradition against, for example, the Muslim Arab tradition, even if both try to speak about the same notion of transcendence, still they are in many respects exclusive mutually. And I, in this fight, prefer to stand with my tradition than the other tradition. Because this is my duty. I've been formed by this society, by this civilization for many generations. I'm defined by it. My whole approach towards the world is defined by this European civilization. I don't want it to disappear. And I think the European civilization has a right to stand its own ground, to defend its right to survive in its own region, not because it is better than the others, but because it's our own, basically. It's not fighting against others because they are inferior or evil. It's just defending what is one's own against the others, as we are bound to defend and to prefer our family to other families, not because we believe that our specific family is better or superior than the others, but because we are bound by tradition, we are bound by many links, we are bound by duty. Already in the Bible, you have the allusion to the fact that you first need to be in solidarity with your own household, then with others. There is an ordo caritatis that has been defined since the Middle Ages, that it is not just right, but it is also our duty to have this concentric understanding of responsibility. And so this is why, of course, this fight in the future will be based in just to summarize what I said on these two levels. On the one hand, there could be provisional alliances between Christian and Muslims on moral grounds. This is already happening in the UK, for example. Christians and Muslims are sometimes fighting together in order to keep radical pro-abortion or LGBT stuff out of school manuals, for example. There can be provisional, let's say, alliances between people believing in tradition. But on the other hand, the other battleground will be, of course, to try to to save as much as possible the cohesion and survival of the European civilization. And this is really difficult because in many towns this is already lost. And this is also why, to conclude, I would like to go back to this idea of civilizations having the same evolution. If you look, for example, at another book I wrote, the other that has been translated into Dutch also, Op weg naar het Imperium, I try to show how the late Roman Republic is very similar to today's European civilization, and how the empire of Augustus can be interesting also when it comes to the resolving of the migration question, because he tried to redefine what Romanitas meant on a traditionalist conservative point of view. So he didn't understand Romanitas and Roman identity as an ethnic identity that would be biologically exclusive, but as a voluntary adhesion to a certain way of life and a certain civilization, a certain love for civilization. And if people from non-Roman backgrounds started to learn Latin, to wear the toga, to do their military service, to become active in politics, to be generous when it came to sponsorizing games or temples or that kind of stuff, who believed or who at least expressed their love for the Roman civilization and Roman art, and expressed also their loyalty to the emperor and so forth. Well, with every step, they were more included into the Roman elite, and at the end could become senators and even emperors like the others. And I think that is what we need to do as Europeans. We need to redefine what makes Europe European in an inclusive way. And the more that people from other backgrounds tend to integrate into such a framework, the more they're welcome to share it also. I think this is the only thing we can do if we do not want to lose it all.
I think that's a beautiful conclusion. Also, it's a hopeful conclusion. I would say it reminds me of and maybe you've heard of the migration scientist Jan van der Beek, who also has, I think, the same conclusion, what he calls inclusive patriotism, which I think has the same essence. So maybe for the Dutch listeners, they are familiar with Jan van der Beek, I think. So this is interesting point of similarity, I would say. I think you gave a beautiful overview of what's at stake and what is in front of us. So maybe we can end on a personal note. How in your own lives, how do you try to, besides, and I'm not talking about your professional life, but more your personal life, if there's anything you want to share, how do you try to incorporate this European tradition and culture and identity in a way that might be relatable to other people?
Yeah, that is really interesting. Well, this is the reason why I wrote that book, because in 24 chapters, I tried to show what I'm trying to do myself also. So this is not about teaching other people from above how they should behave. It's rather also sharing with them my own approach. And I mean, what I'm trying to do, obviously. In my everyday life, well, I'm trying to learn more and more about my civilization. I'm trying to find God. I've tried, and I think I've managed also to find my way towards transcendence, towards prayer, towards meditation. I try as best as I can to surround myself with a certain beauty. Well, perhaps not necessarily this office, but even that. I mean, I'm trying to create an environment where I live with my family that corresponds to certain aesthetic values. I'm trying to work with nature. We are trying to have our own vegetables. We had some chicken, for example, and so forth, in order to have this connection with nature. I founded a family. I have 3 kids. I'm trying to educate them in this, let's say, in this mindset. They are trilingual, so they speak fluently Polish, French, and German. So they are truly Europeans, not cosmopolists, but Europeans, because I try to show them why our civilization is not only made up of crimes and genocides and so on. There have been dark sides. I would never negate them, but also so many beautiful things. So just some little parts of the 24 chapters I did in that book that describe a little bit my own endeavor, how we can incorporate and integrate into our individual lives this tradition and this love for our civilization. And I think that everyone can do that, but everyone needs to find the appropriate steps and to grow with that. It's not a program where you check just off a list and then you are perfect European or traditionalist. No, it's rather a long way to God, finally, or to our understanding of God.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And if, let's say, people want to follow more of your work, what's the best way for people to do that?
For the moment, it would be probably on my X profile, I would say. So that can be quite easily found. David Engels 12, I think, and that is where I publish most of my stuff. But I also have a YouTube channel. So these are probably the 2 ways to see what's up with my activities.
Great. Thank you very much for coming on today to have this important discussion.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
And lastly, of course, I also want to thank all our listeners. As we talked about today, the only way forward is to take personal responsibility. These kind of conversations, we cannot have without your support. So if you're not a subscriber yet, please go to nieuwrechts.nl and become a subscriber to make these kind of conversations possible. Thank you, and see you in the next one.